Welcome back to some new malicious compliance stories, where people comply to the letter, but not the spirit of a request. I hope you had a great day. The first story is called Manager Approval. I work as a cashier at a low-price store. I told my store manager last year that to help out during times of need, I don't mind being trained as another manager temporarily, until he could find someone to replace the one that was leaving. Everything worked well. I also ended up switching back and forth between my original store and the deadbeat one closer to home. When I got back to my original store, I was able to keep the manager position on paper, the pay raise and the privileges. One day I somehow was $5 down. This has never happened to me before. Store manager figured it was because I had used these privileges without calling my coworker. Amazing manager, over to supervise. I have been off for several months due to deadbeat store issues. Store manager then told me that I needed to call management anytime I needed to do anything that a normal cashier couldn't do without calling them. Cue malicious compliance. The next day I did exactly that. Any multi-purchase of 24 items or more, I called management over. Associate sale? Manager. Exchange? Sure. Manager? I had warned the amazing manager that I was planning on doing this. She got fed up that second time and gave me her code cause she knew I could do the job and she was too busy actually running the store. The day came where I did this with store manager. By the time I paged the second time, he said, "Just do what you need. Let me know when you used your code at the end of the day. Might be small, but it felt good." The next story is called Petty Demands. This happened a while ago when we lived on a city block of semi-detached houses with tiny front yards. At one point, the older guy who lived next door passed away, and a flipper got hold of the house. They basically did a cosmetic pass and sold it for tons more than they paid. The new neighbor seemed nice, but immediately began having tons of problems with the house, and a couple of years later moved across the country and abandoned the property. I had their number and called to ask if they minded me cutting the grass in front because it was really long. They were super apologetic and explained they just couldn't afford to keep up with the repairs and the mortgage. The house was going to be foreclosed on. They even tried to pay me for cutting the grass, which I refused. It only took about 5 minutes extra. These are city yards we are talking about, and kept it from looking like there was a vacant house on the block. One day I had just gotten done cutting the grass and went back inside when there was some knocking at the door. I look out and it's the neighbor 2 houses down, with the vacant in between us attached to their house. They were sort of angrily demanding that I come look at something. Thinking there was something consequential going on, I came out and walked with them to the front of their house. Neighbor looking at the yard in irritation. "Do you see what's going on here?" I looked around but had no clue. It turns out that each time I cut the grass, I was inadvertently blowing grass clippings onto the neighbor's landscape pavers, and they were really not pleased with this. I tried to explain how I was just trying to help keep the block looking nice by cutting the grass, and that as soon as a mild breeze came by, the grass clippings would vanish from their pavers. Well, they weren't too happy with that, and demanded that I keep the clippers off their pavers, or sweep them off whenever I cut the grass. At that point I was pretty annoyed, but just said in my nicest neighbor voice, "No problem at all. I'll take care of it. You won't have any more issues." I ran to get a push broom, swept their pavers off really nice, and then proceeded to comply with the request. I made darn sure 0 grass clippings got on their pavers by not ever cutting the grass in front of the abandoned house. Attached to their house, remember. Again, it looked atrocious, until it dawned on them it was now their responsibility, and ended up having to pay someone to keep cutting it until the house went through foreclosure. The third story is called Business Plan. Many years ago, I was tasked with making a business plan for a women-owned and operated business in a rural low-income area where English is not spoken. There was a big grant from outside the country that made this project happen, and a country-based NGO managed the grant. The business had been dependent on the grant for years. The idea was to use the business plan to make the business independent and self-sufficient. Then the grant could then go to a new rural area and begin again with a new business employing new women. I worked for the NGO administering the grant. I explained that I was not the best person to do a business plan because I don't speak the language, I never owned a business, I don't have a business degree, nor have I ever taken a business course, and I don't have any experience or knowledge of what a business plan is. They insisted that none of that disqualified me from making a business plan for this project. I should also say that I didn't have the internet to help me. The internet was 3 long bus rides away and would require a stay overnight at a hotel where I would use an expensive internet cafe and get charged by the minute, the 90s. This would all be on my dollar, so I didn't do it. I didn't have a car. The town had one phone line with no outlet. It was just a piece of copper wire to an old phone, guarded by the guy who also reads all your mail. Phone calls were expensive. I imagined that a business plan assessed the efficiency of the use of assets and also tracked and categorized all income and expenses. This was the basis for my plan. I started asking questions and I was asked for the finished plan. I explained that it was taking a bit longer than expected because of language barriers, but a description of the grant would help. I got a pile of unorganized papers. Some of the papers were in English. I found out that the grant purchased a truck to collect and deliver raw materials and finished products. There were no vehicles in the village. A bus came through, but no one owned a vehicle. No one had ever seen a truck. Also, it said that the grant purchased the building of the business. However, in talking with the locals many times, I learned that the building was rented. I met the owner, who had no affiliation with the business. They just said collecting rent money each month. This was surprising, because I had been told by the NGO that the building was owned by the business. I imagined that somewhere there was someone in the capital city sitting on a fat stash of cash, enough to buy a house, and driving a free truck to their summer house with a pool. It occurred to me that they picked me to make the business plan because I wouldn't do a thorough job and find these discrepancies. They also would not expect me to report the embezzlement to the organization doing the embezzlement. However, that is what I did. I told the NGO that self-sufficiency would always be a long way off if the business was hampered by the rent that was more than the collective monthly wages. I mentioned that selling the truck might help, as it appears not to be used for the purposes listed in the grant. I sent my business plan. The country that provides the grant visited. The missing truck mysteriously showed up. The ambassador person was surprised to see me in this rural village. I looked like I was not from there, and they spoke some English. They asked if I lived there. I said yes. They asked if I knew what was going on. I said yes. The NGO person from the capital was there and overheard. They knew what I knew, and also knew that the ambassador would not love to hear about embezzlement, even though it is common in low-income areas with NGOs. That is when I lost my job. I never told the ambassador that money was misappropriated. I believed that to do so would result in some consequences where I would be at a tremendous disadvantage in the country that the ambassador would not be able to help me with. Also, the fact that the conversation ended there tells me that the ambassador was not there at their first rodeo and knew that it was 90% performance. I think he genuinely wanted to see some good come to the village, even if it didn't meet the level specified in the grant. I feel proud of what I did, because I probably could have turned in a crap business plan, and they would have praised me for it. But I did exactly what I was told, even though it was difficult and challenging. And for that, my services were no longer needed. I guess I'm missing the part where they faced the consequences of my compliance. But it felt good to let them know they were not so sly as they thought. And I got out of a situation where I could have been partly blamed for corruption had I stayed. Thanks for watching the video. I hope you enjoyed it. Please don't forget to leave a like, comment and subscribe. And if you have time, watch another one of my videos. And now, I hope you have a great day. See you soon. Bye bye.